So yeah, thanks ever so much for tuning into today's session. This is our From Talk to Action series, where we cover a number of different ED and I related topics. And today's topic is called Beyond Policies, Embedding Inclusion into Your Company's DNA. So these are webinars that I run every fortnight. And the mission of these webinars is to help you create the best place on earth to learn how to build inclusion into how your business runs. So I'd like to begin today's session with a quick poll. So today's question, I'll just launch it in Zoom. Just bear with me while I find it. Oh, here we go. So today's poll, the question that I've got is, when you think of EDI in your organization, which statement feels the most true? But number one is we have a policy, but it's rarely referenced. Number two is we run occasional initiatives, but no sustained change. The third option is inclusion is built into how we work, but inconsistently. The fourth option is inclusion is part of our DNA. It's led from the top of the business. And then the final option is I'm not sure. So if you could just respond to that survey. Great. So we're up to 77% response rate, which is really good. I'm now going to end the poll and share the results with you. And the majority of people have voted for sort of 4 out of 7 people, 57%. Inclusion is built into how we work, but inconsistently. So this is something I see really often, actually. So it rings true. That's closely followed by we run occasional initiatives, but no sustained change. But it sounds like for the majority of people on today's call, inclusivity is built into how you work, but it's done so inconsistently. So the mission here is to think about how we really get it embedded into the DNA of your organization so that it's consistent and sustainable going forwards. So thanks ever so much for sharing that. The problem that I kind of want to share with you is that a lot of organizations that I talk to have policies, but they don't necessarily have the practice or the follow through. So a lot of organizations will treat equity, diversity and inclusion, or ED&I as a compliance exercise. Very often they've drafted or written a policy, but that policy sits on the intranet somewhere and it's gathering dust. It's not really turned into any kind of tangible action that's really shifting the culture or the DNA of the organization. And sometimes this policy acts as a bit of a catalyst for superficial action. So a lot of organizations run things like annual awareness days, or they might change their logo because it's LGBT Pride Month, for example, or they make diversity statements or platitudes. But these things don't really deliver the desired impact that the HR teams or the senior leadership teams ultimately want to see. But we need to have leadership, ownership, and accountability. Because if we don't have the leaders driving the change from the top of the organization, then we are going to have a disconnect between a stated policy and ultimately the culture of the organization and how people feel and behave, and I suppose give them a sense of belonging in the organization. So whilst focusing on the compliance side of things might protect you from mitigating legal risks, it doesn't really help in the kind of the long-term sustainability of the culture of your organization in terms of creating a sense of belonging within your business, creating a culture of respect where people can bring as much of themselves to work as they want to, or we can't really capitalize on the benefits of having a diverse workforce, like an increase in creativity, innovation, problem solving, and things like that. So the challenge that we've got when we try to really embed ED&I into your organization is how do we move from a passive policy to an active practice so that effectively your senior leaders are walking the talk. So the senior lead, an insight that I got having worked with lots of different organizations, and before setting up my own consultancy, I was an in-house diversity and inclusion practitioner at both Deloitte and the BBC. So I've got sort of first-hand experience of working in large complex organizations and trying to shift things within large businesses, is that senior leaders really do set the tone for the rest of the organization. A partner that I worked with at Deloitte said that the leaders are the custodians of your culture. That was a phrase that really stuck with me, and it's one that I use quite a lot. Whether you like it or not, your employees look up at the top of your business to see how your senior leaders are behaving, and they will emulate that behavior, whether that's consciously or unconsciously. So if you are a senior leader, people are watching your moves and what you say and what you do, and they are mirroring your actions and your behaviors and things like that. And if an employee looks up at the top of at the top of your organization and they don't see themselves reflected or represented, they might tend to check out. They might look up and go, you know what? I don't see myself reflected. Therefore, I don't see a future for myself in this organization. I can't see a clear path to the top of the business. So they might end up leaving your organization, or they might just not want to progress. And you might have somebody who's like really great potential talent who is almost like hitting this glass ceiling because they can't see themselves really reflected at the top of the business. And also, it's important that your senior leaders start to see ED&I as a strategic growth driver. It's not a box ticking exercise. It's not something that only your HR department should be doing, or this kind of side project. When you get ED&I right, it really does help you grow your business. And that's why I wrote my first book called Inclusive Growth. I wanted to try and codify somehow what organizations were doing well, and how, when they were doing ED&I well, how it was actually helping them grow and develop their business. And then you also need to find a way of linking ED&I back to your organizational vision and values, and how it helps drive or fuel your business performance. So some organizations will have very clear, explicitly stated values around diversity and inclusion. So they might have a value that says something like, we value differences. We celebrate our diversity. Or there might be some implied values. So for example, when I worked at the BBC, one of my favorite values was that we are one BBC. Great things happen when we work together. Now, arguably, you can't work well together and you can't collaborate well together if you're not operating in an inclusive way. So the BBC can't be one BBC if you don't have that culture of collaboration and inclusivity going on. And leaders are really there to help create the right climate of change. In my books, I talk about different change management models. One of the models that I like is the John Kotter 7 steps of change management. And he talks about kind of the first phase of effective change management is all about creating the right climate of change. And he says that you need to have a coalition of senior leaders that are creating the vision for change and that are really driving the change from the top of the organization and starting to communicate that change out to the rest of the business. But in order to create that right climate of change, it's really important that your senior leaders are curious, that they demonstrate vulnerability, that they're humble, that they don't have this kind of big ego, that they say things like, I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to go out and find all the answers, or I'm going to take time to be more empathic to understand what other people's lived experience is like. And they're consistently demonstrating inclusive leadership behaviors. Now, one of the things that we can look at is the mindset of an inclusive leader. And in a previous webinar that I did with you, we went through the 6 behaviors of inclusive leaders that was developed by an organization that we work with called Talogy, who have assessments throughout the whole of the employee lifecycle. Now, they've developed an assessment called Perceptions, which measures 6 inclusive leadership behaviors that they devised. And these 6 behaviors are a framework that they created years ago with a project that they did with the Metropolitan Police in London when they were looking at what inclusive leadership behaviors should look like. But this is another model that I want to share with you. And this is the kind of the visual matrix of domination, which was it was started around looking at anti-racism and the role of privilege, and it was developed by Patricia Hill Collins. And the reason why I like to use this model is she talks about kind of 3 or 4 different domains of power. And it's really important that as senior leaders, we understand how these different power dynamics play out in our organization and what we can do to really address these power imbalances or power dynamics. So first of all, she talks about the structural domain of power. And this is really how organizations are designed and structured and kind of what the institutional power dynamics are. So it's looking at things like how are you doing your performance management process? And as a senior leader, what is the status quo? Where are the biases? Where are the inequities or inequalities within your performance management process? And how, as a senior leader, can you start to challenge those obstacles for people? She then talks about the disciplinary domain of power. And this is really about things like how your management is organized or what the rules of the game are. So again, she sort of says, how are we challenging that? And then the third level is what she calls the interpersonal domain of power. And this is kind of our relationships between each other. So this is the biases that we might hold as human beings. It's about what people's different lived experiences are. It's about the stereotypes that we might hold about each other. So how do we challenge ourselves on that kind of individual level? And then the wraparound on the left-hand side of this model is what she calls the sort of the hegemonic or the cultural power domain. So this is really around what the status quo and how the status quo is being maintained, and whether you're, as a senior leader, you're able to challenge the status quo and you're able to challenge the norms of an organization. So I just find this quite a useful framework to think about in terms of like, you could almost like write this down on a piece of paper and think, as a senior leader, how am I going to challenge bias and inequalities and inequities at the structural level, at the kind of the disciplinary level, at the interpersonal level, and at the kind of the cultural or the norms level. And we need to then work with your senior leaders to really help them or empower them to do things like calling out bias or inequalities when they see it, to build psychological safety and trust within your team, and to take a much more of a data-driven decision approach to removing the systemic barriers. And an associate of mine called Dr. Christopher Owen talks about the importance of co-liberation. And co-liberation is about working with people to come up with solutions. It's about not doing it to people. So what this means in an organizational context is, how could you co-liberate with or collaborate with your suppliers in your supply chain or your key strategic partners? So for example, when I worked in big companies, we would often outsource front of house services or security to another company. We might outsource IT services to an IT provider. How could you work with those businesses to help you on your ED&I journey? How could you collaborate with your employee resource groups if you've got them? How could you collaborate with your customers? or your clients? How could you collaborate with community interest groups? So, for example, a client of mine in the northwest of the UK has done a lot of work with local mosques as a way of trying to create a more inclusive workplace. So those are some of the steps that you can take. So there are some issues that when ED&I is kind of kept within the four walls of HR, there are I think some common pitfalls that I see. So very often ED&I is delegated to HR or the employee resource groups. So that accountability is not shared across the senior leadership teams. Senior leaders are also often that they often avoid talking about ED&I because they are worried about saying the wrong thing. They don't want to put their foot in it. They don't want to cause offense. Quite often there's a bit of imposter syndrome involved as well. People feel like if they're in a senior leadership position that they should know all the answers. But that's not always the case. So it's about being humble and about understanding what you don't know and go and get that information. I often find that ED&I initiatives are not linked to the core business strategy, that it's often a separate strategy. Sometimes it's not even embedded within the HR or the people strategy, and it's certainly not embedded into the wider business strategy. And I loved working with a client a couple of years ago. They are a consultancy company headquartered in Manchester. And they had this business strategy called the Good Growth Strategy. And it was all about how they were growing their business to make a positive impact on society. That's why it was called the Good Growth Strategy. And I think what was really key was that ED&I was embedded into that broader good growth business strategy. It wasn't seen as a separate ED&I strategy, or it wasn't seen as a separate people strategy. It was really, really embedded into the broader business strategy. Another kind of issue that I see is that when we come to measuring the impact of ED&I, it's often about measuring activity rather than measuring the outcomes that we see. So it's things like how many courses have we rolled out? What's the participation rate of those courses being rolled out? It's not actually, well, what's the outcome of the activities that we're doing? And I often feel like with a lot of organization, I call it the inclusion cliff. There's often a lot of early enthusiasm, but that often fades when other priorities come along or the business case isn't sustained in the long run. So those are some of the challenges. So with that in mind, how do we actually shift from having a policy on a page to really getting this embedded into the DNA of your organization? So firstly, it's really important that leaders are role modeling inclusivity on a daily basis. They're embedding it into the way that they make their decisions. Those could be small decisions, but they could be big decisions like who's going to get promoted to take on a massive role in the organization, if we're going to relocate an office to another part of the country or another part of the world, how do we do so inclusively and equitably? Embedding it into their hiring decisions, their promotion decisions, or the supply chain, the partners that you work with. The ED&I is really embedded into the strategy of your organization. It's embedded into your performance metrics or your performance goals. And it's embedded into your leadership development. Whenever I do inclusive leadership development programs, I often say to my clients that I'm not asking you to do anything extra here. I'm just asking you to take the good leadership that you're already doing, but just turning the dial up and just making it a lot more refined and polished. And actually, collaboration goes beyond your organizational walls. We need to be thinking, going back to what Dr. Christopher Owen talks about, who I mentioned earlier, the co-liberation piece. It's not just about what happens within the four walls of your organization, but how could you use your organization as a powerful force for good to help improve society much more broadly? How can you really drive that inclusive growth for your industry as well as your business? So how can you collaborate with other organizations in your sector, key strategic partners and things like that? But we really have to kind of have a mindset shift from moving away from trying to fix people or fix individuals to fixing the systems and redesigning the processes or the ways of working to be a lot more accessible, inclusive, and equitable, because it's not about trying to fix people, it's trying to fix the processes or the systems that are effectively getting in our way, slowing us down, preventing us from being able to thrive in the roles that we've got. Ultimately, we want to get to a point where ED&I is just simply the way that business is done here, that we're known for operating in this way, that it's not a habit, but that it's not a project, but it becomes a habit in the long run. So with that in mind, I'd like to just open up the conversation to everybody in this group. What is one leadership action that you'd like to take to move inclusion from policy to practice in your business? Feel free to just unmute yourself and share your thoughts with us.
Hi.
Oh yeah,
Hello. I'm trying to put my camera on, but it doesn't seem to be. Oh, hang on. Start video. Doesn't seem to be working.
sorry.
Hi. Hi,
Hey
I'm
Jen,
Jen. Hi. I'm the Chief People Officer at Chester Zoo. Nice to meet everybody.
good to meet you.
Good to meet you. I think everything that you've said is really insightful and has sort of given me a lot of food for thought. We're definitely in the space of like we've got some really great practice and we do have a really strong culture, but it's not we don't have any kind of written down strategy or plan around ED&I or specific priorities and objectives. So we're doing good stuff, but we're not really doing it in a focused way. I
Mm,
think we've started some workshops just this week actually with employees to get their feedback on what they would like to see from our inclusion strategy. And one of the things coming out quite loud and clear, both from a people perspective, but also from a guest and visitor perspective, is our accessibility.
yeah,
We don't, and it's obviously a tough one. You know, if we've not got super accessible spaces, it's not quick and easy and cheap to fix that, is it? But I think, you know, there are lots of things that we do well, but we don't signpost and we don't
mm,
tell people. So it's almost like if you know, you know, and if you ask, you get. But
yeah,
I think that's the one of the things that we'd like to just make it much easier for people to know what's on offer to support individuals,
yeah,
without them having to say, "Oh, I need support with this."
yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's been coming through this week. But there's loads of different
That's
things.
really good. Yeah, I like that because I don't know if you can see on the camera because I've got a fake background, but I'm a wheelchair user, so I've got some sort of first-hand experience of accessibility. And I think if you take something like going to a zoo, there's probably you're probably already doing some really good stuff, like you say, but not communicating it effectively. So it's like that could be a quick win in terms of communicating it so that when somebody is thinking about going to the zoo, they can easily go on the website, find details that will help them feel a lot more confident about coming out to the zoo,
Yeah, exactly.
or asking for help if it's not there. Um, then I suspect that if you were to do like an effectively an audit of accessibility, there's probably stuff that actually is fairly easy to improve that are some quick wins. And then yeah, there'll be the harder stuff to fix that will take time and effort to do. So yeah,
Mm,
yeah, definitely. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah,
that's okay.
cool. That's a really good suggestion. Uh,
Yeah,
and
thanks.
also, I think actually you've made a really good start in terms of talking to your people. Um, I always say to people like you have to start with your own people and get their insights into what's really going on for them in the organization.
Yeah,
Cool.
great. Thanks. Thanks,
Thank
Toby.
you. Great. Anybody else? Kind of what's a leadership action that you would like to do to move inclusivity from a policy into practice in your business?
I think a lot of leaders I work with, they always talk about inclusion like, I've done that. I've run this program. I've done this. I'm all over it. I don't need to think about it again. It's done.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's changing that mindset sort of thing. This isn't an objective you tick off. Oh, okay. I attended a couple of meetings and I've run. I sponsored a program. We're inclusive now.
Yeah.
It's getting it to see that sort of continuous improvement.
Yeah.
And I think what you were saying before, as an EDI professional, I tend to go into a lot of things as if I know nothing. So if someone's sharing to me what it's like being in a wheelchair, or what it's like, being a Muslim in an area where there are no other people like them, I don't know. So I try to sort of, not be an idiot, but not say, oh, I know exactly where you're coming from. I think a lot of people, they almost think they know. Yeah, they know the issues. They know what you're going to say before you say it. So they're already coming up to say what they've done about it and why it's not a problem before they've actually listened and tried to help.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, that beginner's mindset is really important. And also, I think we talked about this on a previous webinar, and I mentioned it earlier, that the 6 inclusive leadership behaviors that were developed by Talogy. The number 1 on the list is empathy. And empathy is about actually creating the space to understand where somebody else is coming from. It's not about sympathy. It's not about saying to somebody, oh, I feel really sorry for you. I know what it's like. I've been in a similar situation to you, because we're all individual human beings. And if we may have been in a similar situation, but I've got a different perspective on things to you. And it's one of the traits of an inclusive leader is empathy, about creating that space to understand where somebody's really coming from, and to make sure that they are fully heard and understood and listened to. And so, yeah, that's a really good point. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. Thank you. Cool. Great. And I like the point that you started off with, Adam, was sort of saying a lot of leaders are like, oh, I've ticked the box, I've attended that training workshop. But actually, and that's why I've called this webinar Shifting to the DNA, because this is actually about a cultural piece. This is not a HR project. This is not something that is done in 6 months. It should, over time, get really fully embedded. It's part of the way that you do business. It's linked to your core values as an organization. Sometimes my clients don't actually connect the dots until they've had a conversation with me around the connection between core values and ED&I. And actually that can be quite a game-changing conversation if you sit down with your senior leadership team and go, okay, we've got our stated values, but how does diversity and inclusion link to those values? Is there a direct connection? Is there an implicit connection? And how does it even bring our values to life? So let's say you've got a value around, we are creative and innovative. Well, actually having a diverse workforce will help you do a better job of being creative and innovative, because you've got different lived experiences, different perspectives around the table that can only help with innovation and creativity. And quite often senior leaders are like, oh, I hadn't thought of it like that before. Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Any other thoughts on this question?
One, it kind of follows on from what both yourself and Adam have just been talking about in it really providing that gateway into empathy, and it's the fact that we've done some reverse mentoring in this field, and it has had such a huge impact on allowing people to reverse mentor our senior leadership, to let them know concepts they'd never even thought about, experiences and perspectives they'd never seen. And I think more rolling out that, and more new to the business, younger people who aren't in those leadership positions, to feed that up and to provide a space where leaders can get things wrong and they're safe to do so and can learn from others is huge step, and where we've done it, we've seen great results. But I think we all know what the market is like at the moment, particularly in recruitment, where we're based, and it's tough. So it can be very difficult to focus on these things that are not seen as direct income generating, when in fact they are
definitely
long-term income generating.
Definitely. I like your point around reverse mentoring, or I like to talk about reciprocal mentoring. So it's a two-way mentoring relationship, is really good. And the reciprocal mentoring is really powerful, because if we look at something like a senior leader working with somebody who's just fresh out of school, a Generation Z, Gen Z, they've both got something to teach the other person. So the senior leader's got heaps of experience. They know how the business world works. They've been there, they've done that, they got the t-shirt. Equally, the Gen Zs people, there's some really fascinating research around the work expectations of Generation Z. They've grown up in a world where they've grown up with the internet. They don't know what life was like before the internet, or before smartphones, and they are fully embracing artificial intelligence and how that can help us in the world of work nowadays. So it's brilliant. It's brilliant. I've got another question for everybody. I'm not going to do this as a breakout conversation, because we're quite a small group today, and actually I think the conversation's flowing quite nicely today. But my other question for you is, if your senior leaders fully lived inclusion, what would be different in your organization in 12 months' time? Be interested to get your thoughts on this. This is a good opportunity to kind of think expansively. What, in an ideal world, what would things look like?
I think more people would probably start to feel included rather than tolerated. I think when you move away from just having the individual events and initiatives, and you make sure everything you're doing is coming from the top, then I mean, I don't know, is 12 months long enough? There's probably a lot more that needs to be done than that, but I think in that first 12 months, I think it would, you'd start seeing people believe that there can be further change and things can improve and get better in the long term.
And what do you think the impact on the business is if you move from tolerance to full inclusion?
I think the evidence shows time and time again, people are more likely to stay within an organisation when they feel that they are included and they are a key part of it. So just on that alone, not saying anything against anyone who works in recruitment, but less recruitment costs because you're having to bring less new people in. And people just my last role was with a hospital trust, and seeing people stay and further their career when they did feel that they were included, move into roles, and then bring that sort of those inclusive behaviours with them as they became managers and leaders, to sort of keep the ball running and move even more of the things that we were trying to do forward.
Brilliant. Thank you. I love that. Thanks. Anybody else? If we were having this conversation this time next year, and you were like, oh my God, it's amazing, the last 12 months have been fantastic, I really feel like our senior leaders are really living inclusion now, what would have shifted for you?
I think for me, it's hard to pin down. It's not a very smart objective, but I think it would just a deeper understanding and empathy from everybody in the organization for everybody else in the organization. And like you said, the people acting and talking curious, and they are trying to trying to take on different perspectives so that they can understand each other,
Yeah.
and not make assumptions or not, just, I think to me it's about the quality of the conversations that I would be hearing and the types of, so for managers or for leaders, the types of discussions that we'd be having in terms of the needs of our employees and the wants and the kind of the different perspectives that people bring.
Yeah.
There is, there are little things that would shift, I think, around collaboration that would be really powerful from an organizational perspective, like really beneficial, that would obviously have an impact on business performance, because the more voices that are heard and perspectives that are actually fully listened to and included, the better decisions that we'll make.
Yeah.
So to me, I think if I'd encapsulate it, it would be like that kind of growth in understanding, empathy, and true collaboration.
Yeah. And ultimately, what impact would you hope that has at the zoo?
Like I say, I think better decision making, more effective decision making, which would reduce which would reduce costs, which would make, sort of, align with our priorities and our objectives, and allow us to maybe reflect on things that we've done in the past that we haven't done as well, take lessons forward, learn from it. I think the vulnerability piece is really important, and you mentioned that earlier. And people actually being able to go, yeah, I made a mistake there, or I didn't realize that and I'd like to be better.
Yeah, definitely. When Brooklyn's my colleague, whenever we do like inclusive leadership training, this is a top tip for everybody. A conversation that we like to do is sort of get them to visualize a humble leader and just hear what people come up with. Very often they'll come up with Michelle and Barack Obama, by the way. But just having that conversation about who do you believe is a humble leader, and what qualities do they have, and how can we bring those qualities into our discussions and our decision making? So it's quite a nice SLT conversation.
Toby, can I ask you a question? How do you articulate why humble leadership is really important?
So I like to do, and you can use this exercise actually on a number of different things, but I like to do the 5 why exercise. So it's a root cause analysis thing that I learned when I was a project manager, but you ask why 5 times. So what you would do, you would sit down with your senior leaders and you would go, okay, so why is being a humble leader important to us as a team? And they'll come up with their answers. So, and then you go, okay, yes, and why is that important? And you keep going until you've got 5, until you've done it 5 times. And then you've got a final answer, and then you have a conversation about that. Yeah.
Great.
And I do that with why is diversity and inclusion important here, because quite often a senior leader, they'll come up with surface level stuff. So they'll say, oh, it's about delivering, it's the right thing to do. Or they might say something like, we'll provide a better quality of service to our visitors or customers, or our people will be happier. They'll come up with stuff like that. And then we go, okay, yes, and why? Why is it that our people are happier? And then might go, well, they'll stick around for longer. Okay, yes, and why is that important? Well, it will reduce our cost of attrition. So you keep kind of digging, and then the answer that you end up with is a lot more richer than that surface level answer that you start with. Yeah. Cool.
That sounds great.
So if you do want to have a call with me just to talk about how you can embed EDI into your organization, I just want to say that this is not a sales conversation. I did start the webinar saying I'm not going to sell anything to you, and I'll stick to that promise. I've genuinely got time in my diary. So if you want to have a half an hour conversation with me and you've got questions that you feel like you couldn't answer, ask me today, or you're watching this video on YouTube after we've actually done the live session. If you want to have a half an hour conversation with me, just scan the QR code on the screen. That will give you direct access to my diary. And you can have 30 minutes of my time, and we can really talk about how we embed EDI into your organization. And hopefully that will be of some help to you. We do these webinars every fortnight. So the next topic will be called Building Inclusion into Every Employee Touchpoint. And I'll be talking about the employee lifecycle from your talent acquisition through to recruitment, onboarding, performance development, and even talking about exiting, inclusive exiting, which is something that we don't often talk about. So if you are interested in learning how you can embed inclusion into the different stages of the employee lifecycle, then tune into that topic. Thanks ever so much for joining me today. It's been lovely to see you. Hopefully what I've talked about has been helpful in some way. And if there's anything that I can do to support you on your ED&I journey, then feel free to reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn, of course. You can just ping me a message on LinkedIn. You can drop me an email, or you can book time in my diary for a 30-minute chat. Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Toby. It's been really, really great.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Thanks for coming along. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.